He thought he had lost everything. But it was only at his son's grave that he found out who his son really was. It was an early, desolate morning when Alexander Blackwell, one of the world's most influential billionaires, pulled up in his sleek, black car to the old, neglected cemetery on the outskirts of the city. Despite his enviable success and the power he wielded in boardrooms worldwide, today he was not the imperious magnate seen by the public. Instead, he was a man weighed down by an unbearable loss. A loss so profound that his life, once filled with purpose and relentless drive, had been reduced to mere existence in the shadow of tragedy. Alexander's only heir, his beloved son, had perished several months ago in an unforeseen calamity that shattered not only his personal world, but the legacy he had so painstakingly built. From that fateful day, everything had come to a standstill. None of the accolades, none of the financial triumphs could fill the aching void left by his son's absence. The billionaire had retreated into himself, isolating from the world, and now, driven by equal parts ritual and mourning, he found himself at his son's grave, a modest stone marker bearing the name he once cherished with endless pride. As Alexander stepped out of his car, the cold morning air brushed against his face like a cruel reminder of time's relentless march. He walked slowly down the worn gravel path, each step measured and heavy with sorrow. The cemetery was nearly empty, the silence punctuated only by the rustling of a few brittle leaves along the curved paths and the distant call of a lone bird. Here, amidst rows upon rows of forgotten monuments and faded epitaphs, he paused in front of his son's modest grave. The engraved letters on the tombstone, simple and enduring, spoke of a promise unfulfilled, a future lost. Standing there, drowning in memories and unspoken grief, Alexander's mind was a tumult of emotions. He recalled the bright, ambitious eyes of his son, eyes that had once mirrored his own determination to change the world. Yet on that day, the brilliant potential of youth was suffocated by the tragedy that stolen him away. The contrast between the public image of success and the private ache of loss had driven Alexander into a state of perpetual isolation, making him an enigma even to those closest to him. Just as he was lost in the labyrinth of his darkest thoughts and regret, a slight movement at the edge of his vision made him turn sharply. There, standing by the base of the gravestone, was an unexpected sight. A little boy, no older than 10, emerging from the shadows. The boy was dressed in worn, humble clothes that bore unmistakable signs of poverty. Yet it was his posture, a blend of quiet confidence and solemn dignity, that caught Alexander's eye. Clutched in the boy's tiny hand was a handmade card, its paper rough and edges uneven, as if crafted with utmost care despite limited resources. For a long moment, silence reigned between them. The billionaire's hardened features, long etched with the pain of loss, suddenly registered surprise and a flicker of curiosity. With a gruff tone laced with both authority and a hidden vulnerability, Alexander demanded, "Who are you?" His voice trembled with the weight of unresolved grief and guarded disdain for intrusions upon his sacred solitude. The little boy looked up, his eyes large and earnest, conveying a mix of innocence and resolute purpose that belied his tender age. In a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, the boy replied, "I'm just here to say thank you." He was kind. The simplicity of those words struck Alexander like an unexpected jolt. The boy was referring to his son, the man he had lost, now reduced to memories and untold stories that had long been buried beneath the veneer of wealth and privilege. At that moment, the rigid walls Alexander had built around himself began to tremble. The boy's unassuming appearance and heartfelt words broke through the cold armor of the billionaire's grief. Alexander's mind raced. Questions cascaded like a turbulent river. Who was this child? How did he know my son? And why would a boy from such humble circumstances come to express gratitude for someone he had never met, except through tales whispered by the winds of kindness? The quiet resolve in the boy's eyes, coupled with the meticulous care in the handmade card, hinted at a story Alexander had never heard. A secret life of generosity, empathy, and quiet heroism that his son might have led unbeknownst to the world of wealth from which he hailed. It was a world of shared meals on street corners, of donated books under lamplight, and of lessons taught on battered urban sidewalks, acts of kindness that transcended social boundaries. For Alexander, that lone moment by the grave was transformative. The heavy burden of his grief, honed by years of isolation, began to soften as he listened, truly listened, to the small, brave words of a stranger. In the melancholic silence of the cemetery, beneath a pale sky that promised nothing but introspection, a spark of change was ignited, a glimmer of hope that perhaps, through the unexpected kindness of a humble boy, the true essence of his son's character might yet be reclaimed. In the cold light of that early morning, Alexander Blackwell faced a choice to remain ensnared by the bitterness of unaddressed loss, or to embrace the possibility that his son had lived in ways far richer and more meaningful than the material legacy he had inherited. As he stood there, with the little boy's quiet gratitude echoing in his ears, the billionaire felt the first stirring of a long-buried conviction that perhaps redemption, healing, and even transformation could begin with acknowledging the goodness left behind. Still reeling from the unexpected encounter at his son's grave, Alexander Blackwell stared at the little boy, struggling to reconcile the gentle tone in the child's voice with the raw anguish that had defined his existence since that tragic day. The early morning light cast long, uncertain shadows over the gravestones, as if even the sun hesitated before revealing the secrets of sorrow. For a long, heavy moment, neither spoke. Only the soft rustle of wind through brittle leaves filled the silence. Finally, Alexander's voice, rough with years of suppressed pain, broke the stillness. "Who are you, boy? And what do you mean when you say, 'He was kind'?" His question was more than a challenge. It was an attempt to bridge the tremendous chasm of grief and disbelief that had defined his lonely world. The boy's eyes, deep and sincere despite their youth, met Alexander's gaze. In a measured tone that belied his tender age, the child replied, "My name is Malik. I knew him, your son. He helped me in ways I never expected." Malik's small fingers clutched the handmade card as if it were a fragile treasure, and his gaze flickered briefly to the simple inscription on the card before meeting Alexander's eyes again. Alexander's features tightened with confusion and pain. "Help you? What do you mean? I lost my son months ago. What could he possibly have done to help you?" His voice trembled between anger and desperate curiosity, emotions wrestling for control over memories that refused to fade. Taking a cautious step forward, Malik explained softly yet earnestly, "I come from a part of the city where not everyone has enough to eat or a safe place to learn. I was often hungry, and sometimes I had no one to talk to. One day, I saw him across the street from our little community center. He didn't look like the powerful man in the newspapers. He looked warm, kind. I was shy at first, but he smiled and walked over, offering me his extra sandwich and a book." The boy paused, his gaze drifting toward the modest marker where the weight of loss still lay. "He didn't do it for recognition. He asked me to keep it a secret so I wouldn't embarrass him or even me. He said he just wanted to share what little he had. That kindness should be remembered, not kept hidden." Alexander took a step back, his mind racing through memories he had long buried beneath layers of corporate triumphs and private despair. In his carefully curated public image, his son had been the rebellious heir, a man of privilege adrift in a gilded prison. Yet here, in Malik's careful, unguarded words, a different portrait emerged. One of selfless generosity and quiet heroism that had spanned the invisible gaps between two worlds. With hesitance melting into dawning understanding, Alexander asked, "Tell me more, Malik. How did he help you? I never knew. I never heard any of this." His voice, roughened by grief and the shock of new revelations, carried both an invitation and a plea for answers he had never dared to seek before. Malik's head tilted slightly as he recalled the gentle memories. "Every time I was hungry or cold, he'd come by. Sometimes he'd spend a few minutes just to talk about math or science or even about life. He told me things about dreams and hope, things that made me believe that I could be more than what this place seemed to offer." The child's voice was quiet, yet each word was drenched in a conviction that resonated deeper than any lecture or lesson could in a classroom. "He said that we must always help each other, even if the world doesn't expect it. Because kindness is the one thing that makes people real. Alexander's eyes filled with unshed tears, a mixture of regret, wonder, and the bitter sting of years lost to misunderstanding. "I had no idea," he murmured, barely audible as Malik continued. "He would come quietly. I once heard from another boy that my son left money in little envelopes near community centers and shelters. Money for food, school supplies, even for small medical needs. And not just for me, he helped many who were forgotten by the city. He used to say that the greatest wealth was the ability to share with those who are truly in need." Each word from Malik chipped away at the granite armor of Alexander's self-imposed isolation. Here was undeniable evidence that his son, the heir to an immense fortune, had led a double life. A hidden life marked by compassion and quiet rebellion against a world that often equated worth with wealth. Malik's recollections painted a picture so different from the cruel caricature of indulgence Alexander had grown accustomed to in public circles. Instead, he heard of a man whose generosity transcended social barriers, a man who had silently uplifted those who had nothing to offer in return. As Malik spoke, the morning light seemed to soften around them, as if nature itself acknowledged that truth, no matter how painfully unexpected, brought healing. Alexander's hardened heart, sculpted over years of power plays and corporate success, began to falter under the weight of this lost narrative. "My son. He never once asked for praise or recognition?" Alexander's voice broke, infused with an emotion he thought long dead. "No, sir," Malik answered, his tone gentle yet resolute. "He said that deeds should live in the hearts of those they helped, not in the accolades of the powerful." The stark contrast between the arrogant legacy that had once defined the Blackwell name and this humble, tender testimony shook Alexander to his core. Malik's words, simple and sincere, resonated like a long-forgotten melody that stirred memories of a time when his son had been like a son, not a mere symbol of wealth. In that small corner of a forgotten cemetery, the billionaire began to glimpse a truth far more profound than any balance sheet could reveal. A truth that his son's real inheritance was not in stock portfolios or corporate empires, but in the lives he had quietly transformed. For a long moment, they stood there together in silence. An unlikely meeting between a man cloaked in the regalia of power and a humble child whose words carried the weight of redemption. The air, cool and bracing, was imbued with the promise of change. Alexander Blackwell realized, painfully and beautifully, that the echoes of his son's kindness had not died with him. They had lived on in every life touched by his secret generosity. In the days that followed his heartrending conversation with Malik, Alexander Blackwell found himself oscillating between disbelief and a desperate need for confirmation. Though Malik's words had pierced through the layers of his sorrow and pride, Alexander remained reluctant to fully accept this alternative version of his son, a version steeped in selfless kindness rather than the self-indulgent image he had long assumed. Determined to uncover the truth about the secret life his son had led, Alexander decided to launch a discreet inquiry into Malik's story. That very afternoon, back in his private study within the vast Blackwell estate, Alexander arranged a meeting with his most trusted advisors. The quiet opulence of his surroundings, walls lined with awards and portraits of triumphant moments, provided a stark contrast to the painful questions that now haunted him. With a measured tone, he instructed his team, "I need to verify every detail Malik has shared about my son. Find me the records, the accounts, the testimonials, anything that can either confirm or debunk this hidden legacy of compassion." His voice, though controlled, betrayed an undercurrent of vulnerability that few had ever heard. Over the ensuing weeks, Alexander's team scoured through financial ledgers, personal diaries, and internal memos that had been archived away from the public eye. They reached out to contacts at community centers, local charities, and even discreetly interviewed staff from the few organizations quietly supported by anonymous donors. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. An envelope, marked only with a simple "for hope," was traced to several community shelters. Bank records revealed small, irregular deposits, amounts far too modest to be publicized, routinely deposited by an account held in his son's name. These were not impulsive donations to charity. They were carefully planned gestures of support that spanned several months. One breakthrough came when a director at a modest community center recalled an encounter with a young man whose demeanor was strikingly gentle. "He wasn't like the young men we usually see around here," the director explained over a secure call. "He came in quietly, offered to buy food for the children, and even provided school supplies for those who couldn't afford them. I asked for his name, and he simply said, 'He wants you to know that you are not alone.'" It was as if his heart spoke louder than words. The director's voice quivered with emotion, and the description resonated with every detail Malik had given. As Alexander pored over these findings, he discovered even more intimate proof. Old photographs, obtained from a relative of one of the local volunteers, showed a smiling young man, unmistakably his son, in the company of ragged but grateful children gathered outside a dilapidated community library. In one sepia-toned image, his son was seen distributing neatly folded papers along with what appeared to be a modest allowance. In another, he was caught in a candid moment of conversation with a group of local teenagers, his eyes kind and intent as if imparting wisdom far beyond his years. Each piece of evidence chipped away at the image Alexander had so long clung to, the image of a wayward heir indulging in careless extravagance. Instead, he began to see a mosaic of secret gestures, small acts of generosity woven into the fabric of a community that had otherwise been ignored by the powerful. Testimonies from those in underprivileged neighborhoods painted a picture of a man who not only recognized his own privilege but felt compelled to share it, even if only in the most modest of ways. One evening, as Alexander sat alone in his study, his mind swirling with revelations, he came across a handwritten note tucked among old correspondence. It was unsigned, yet the delicate script bore an uncanny familiarity. The note recounted a day in which a local child had been gifted a book on mathematics, a gift that transformed that child's understanding of possibility. Embedded within the note was an unmistakable signature, his son's first name, written in the same looping script he remembered from childhood letters. That singular discovery served as the definitive confirmation Alexander had been seeking. Overwhelmed, he allowed himself a moment of private anguish and gratitude, a catharsis for the years spent in unyielding isolation from a truth that had been hidden in plain sight. In that quiet hour, Alexander realized that the true legacy of his son was not measured in boardroom triumphs or lavish parties, but in the enduring, invisible trail of kindness and hope that had silently uplifted a generation of forgotten souls. Standing in the dim light of his study, with the echoes of Malik's voice and the verified accounts of benevolent deeds reverberating around him, Alexander began to see his son in a way he never had before. Not as a spoiled heir destined to perpetuate wealth, but as a quiet hero, a man who had used all he had, regardless of how little, to transform lives. In that transformative moment, a desperate seed of redemption was planted within him, a conviction that it was time to bridge the abyss between his former life and a new, more compassionate path. The evidence was undeniable, and the legacy of his son was too magnificent to be confined to the silence of a tombstone. In the weeks after Malik's revelations, Alexander Blackwell found his soul caught in a storm of conflicting emotions. With the evidence of his son's secret generosity still echoing in his mind, he felt compelled to dig deeper into a double life he had never known, one that defied his long-held assumptions about opulence, privilege, and self-indulgence. Determined to honor this newfound truth, Alexander resolved to connect with those who had experienced firsthand the kindness and humility of the man he once believed was lost to debauchery. Late one afternoon, Alexander arranged to visit a humble community center nestled in one of the city's forgotten neighborhoods. The building's faded sign and modest interior bore little resemblance to the gilded halls of his own estate, but within its unpretentious walls lay a tapestry of lives touched by unseen acts of benevolence. Alexander met with Mrs. Hernandez, the center's director, whose lined face and gentle eyes revealed a lifetime spent serving others. Over cups of weak coffee in a cramped office, she recounted the stories of a young man who had appeared not as a spoiled heir, but as a kind stranger who quietly offered food, school supplies, and hopeful words to children struggling against overwhelming odds. "I remember that day clearly," Mrs. Hernandez said, her voice soft yet resolute, "when a young man with an unassuming smile walked in and asked how we could help our kids. He left behind envelopes with money, not large sums, but enough to buy books or a meal. He was polite, almost shy about his generosity, as if he feared that too much kindness might be misunderstood. As she spoke, Alexander's heart pounded with both regret and admiration. Each testimony, each small recounting of his son's secret deeds, shattered the armor of indifference he had once assumed was justified by his world of high finance and repugnant public image. Emboldened by these intimate stories, Alexander sought to speak with more witnesses, children and youths whose lives had been subtly transformed by the mysterious benefactions. Over several days, he visited several additional centers, shelters, and small local schools. One particular encounter stood out. He met a 10-year-old girl named Jasmine, whose eyes shone with a quiet light of possibility. When gently questioned, Jasmine recounted how a kind young man had helped her learn basic arithmetic, patiently explaining concepts even when the rest of the world seemed to have turned a blind eye to her struggles. "He was like a friend who cared," Jasmine whispered, clutching a small, worn-out notebook as if it were a treasure. "He'd come by sometimes and bring pencils and notebooks, and he taught me that numbers could help me build dreams. He said that every number counted, just like every person." Listening to Jasmine, Alexander felt an overwhelming wave of grief for the lost years, when his son's secret identity had remained obscured by the dazzling veneer of wealth. In that fragile child's simple, honest words lay the essence of a hidden life. A life where his son had quietly chosen to befriend the overlooked and the underprivileged. An act of rebellion against a destiny that had been expected to follow the relentless pursuit of profit at any cost. Nonetheless, as powerful as these recollections were, Alexander still wrestled with his own inner doubts. Late one evening in his expansive study, he pored over a series of anonymous letters and loose notes received from community organizers. Each note, written in careful, sometimes trembling handwriting, detailed how his son had not merely been a benefactor, but a compassionate mentor. A man who instilled in disadvantaged youths a belief that their potential was limitless, regardless of the bleak circumstances that beset them. One note described a secret tutoring session in a cramped library corner, where his son patiently helped a group of children prepare for exams and shared his own stories of overcoming obstacles. Another recounted a donated set of books that, while modest, sparked a newfound passion for learning in a boy who had never before dreamed of college. The more Alexander uncovered, the more his internal world shifted. Long years of living in a bubble defined by fiscal triumphs and slick boardroom negotiations had convinced him that his family's narrative was one of relentless ambition and triumph over chaos. Yet now, in this dim-lit underworld of genuine human connection, he began to perceive a subtle but unmistakable contrast. His son had led a life where quiet generosity and empathy transcended the mere accumulation of wealth. The compelling evidence hinted at sacrifices made in secret, a life lived in parallel to the public persona, dedicated to uplifting others away from the glare of luxury and power. In a particularly emotional confrontation with a middle-aged volunteer at a local shelter, Alexander finally allowed himself to open up about his own vulnerabilities. "I never knew," he murmured, his voice shaking with the enormity of his realization, "that my son lived for others, that he had built a hidden world of kindness that defied everything I thought I knew about him." The volunteer, wiping a tear from his weathered cheek, replied softly, "Not many know, sir, but his heart was as big as the world he hoped to change. He asked only that his gifts remain anonymous, so that the goodness, not his name, would light the way for these children." That night, Alexander sat in solitude, the silence of his mansion now permeated by thoughts of a legacy not defined by glitzy headlines or headlines in the business journals, but by quiet moments of unacknowledged grace. The pain of loss intermingled with a deep sense of regret for the years he had wasted in a self-imposed isolation. A timeline where only profits mattered, while the true legacy of his son had remained hidden in the acts of everyday kindness. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the tall windows of his study room, Alexander had made a profound decision. This investigation had not only uncovered the dual life of a lost son, but had forced him to re-examine every value he had long held sacred. He resolved to bring this noble, secret legacy into the light. It was a truth that needed to be honored not only to heal his own shattered heart, but to ensure that the quiet miracles of compassion continued to inspire others. His grief, once a heavy and unyielding chain, was slowly transforming into a catalyst for change. In this newfound clarity, Alexander understood that he, too, had a responsibility, a duty to those whom his son had silently uplifted. The double life his son led was a tender rebellion against a system that had long forgotten how to care for the underprivileged. And now it was time for Alexander to step out of the cold shadow of his past and become part of the legacy. A legacy built not on wealth alone, but on kindness, love, and the compassionate bonds between strangers. In the silent aftermath of the revelations that shattered the polished image of a spoiled heir, Alexander Blackwell found himself at a crossroad. The evidence of his son's secret life, a life dedicated to quietly uplifting others, had forced him, against his long-held convictions, to re-examine every value he once cherished. In the solitude of his vast mansion, surrounded by relics of financial triumph and remembrances of boardroom victories, Alexander began to realize that true wealth was not counted in dollars or power, but in the quiet impact one could have on the lives of those society had forgotten. Every day since that fateful discovery, Alexander had woken with echoes of Malik's gentle voice and the profound testimonies of community members. The images of his son, smiling among humble children, distributing envelopes marked for hope, and spending time to explain simple lessons of mathematics with sincere warmth, danced relentlessly in his mind. The boy's unwavering declaration, "He was kind," resonated like a fragile melody amid a tumultuous symphony of loss, regret, and self-reproach. It was in these moments of introspection that Alexander understood he had failed to see what mattered most. He had once been a man defined by the relentless pursuit of profit and empire building, but now, faced with the undeniable testament of his son's unrecognized generosity, he began to question everything. Late one evening, seated in his study with the soft glow of a solitary desk lamp illuminating rows of financial ledgers and corporate awards, Alexander reached for a leather-bound journal that had belonged to his son. As he flipped through its delicate pages, he encountered scribbled notes about small acts of kindness. Entries that spoke of secret donations to community centers, notes of encouragement left for struggling youths, and reflections on the power of compassion to heal wounds deeper than those inflicted by poverty. Each line was a balm to his aching heart, yet also a searing reminder of the years he had spent in a bubble of calculated ambition, oblivious to the real legacy his son had forged among the less fortunate. Determined to understand fully the secret life his son had led, Alexander began reaching out to the many individuals whose lives had been touched by his son's benevolence. He made discreet phone calls and arranged meetings with directors of local shelters, community center managers, and educators from underprivileged neighborhoods. In these humble settings, far removed from the manicured lawns and ultramodern offices of his world, Alexander listened as people recounted intimate stories of his son's unexpected visits. The night he delivered a modest package of school supplies to a rundown community library, the quiet afternoons when he sat with children under a faded mural, explaining the mysteries of numbers and science in a soft, encouraging tone. The secret envelopes with spare cash and handwritten notes that had made a real difference in the lives of struggling families. Every testimony chipped away at the cold persona Alexander had long upheld. He began to see that his son's hidden acts of charity were not desperate attempts at self-redemption or vanity. They were genuine, heartfelt expressions of empathy, a stark contrast to the ruthless business practices he had come to embody. With each story, Alexander felt his heart soften, and what had once been a fortress of indifference started to crack open, allowing sorrow and hope to mingle in the quiet recesses of his soul. Each conversation, each tearful account of gratitude and transformation, lit a spark that grew into an all-consuming determination to honor his son's memory not by clinging to the vestiges of old power, but by forging a new legacy, a legacy dedicated to compassion, to the bridging of divides, and to the celebration of the human spirit. One crisp morning, as the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, Alexander drafted a proposal, a plan that would channel a portion of his vast wealth into a concrete project that embodied the secret life his son had led. He envisioned the creation of a charitable foundation paired with a community school, named in his son's honor, that would serve as a sanctuary for the forgotten and the underprivileged. a place where knowledge and kindness would be the guiding forces. In the following weeks, Alexander assembled a team of advisors, philanthropists, and community leaders. Meetings were held in conference rooms filled with stark modern lines and echoes of past successes. Yet this time the conversation was different. The agenda was no longer about mergers or market shares, but about social responsibility, innovation in education, and redistributing wealth in ways that truly transformed lives. Alexander spoke passionately during one board meeting, his voice steady and resolute as he recounted the hidden acts of kindness that had redefined his son's life. "My son showed me," he declared, "that true change is born of small, deliberate acts of compassion. We have the power to create a future where every child, regardless of their background, has the opportunity to learn, to dream, and to succeed." The board members listened in silence, some with a newfound respect for a man they had long perceived as cold and unyielding. Plans rapidly took shape. A state-of-the-art community school would be built on the very grounds where the remnants of a rundown playground once lay, long abandoned by the neglect of municipal authorities. The school would offer free, quality education and vocational training for children from impoverished neighborhoods. It would also host community events, workshops, and mentoring sessions, ensuring that the spirit of charity would extend beyond a single day. Alongside the school, the foundation, appropriately named the Legacy Trust, was established to honor his son's memory, dedicated to funding initiatives that made a tangible difference in the lives of those who needed it most. As the day of the groundbreaking ceremony drew near, Alexander's emotions shifted from guarded skepticism to genuine hope. On the morning of the event, he arrived at the modest construction site, a stark, once-forgotten parcel of land now buzzing with activity. As early as the workers, his presence quietly commanding respect. There, amidst the hum of machinery and the earnest chatter of local volunteers, stood Malik, the very boy whose serendipitous encounter at the grave had ignited this entire transformation. Malik now looked a little taller, his eyes still earnest, his clothes even more worn yet imbued with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen miracles unfold. When it was time for a speech, Alexander stepped forward before a modest crowd that had gathered. His voice, once laden with the icy detachment of a billionaire insulated by loss, now resonated with raw sincerity. "Today, I stand before you not as a man of commerce or influence, but as a father who has finally discovered the true measure of wealth," he declared. "My son may have left this world too soon, but his spirit lives on in every kind deed he performed, in every life he touched. This school, this foundation, this is our promise to the future. It is a pledge that no child shall be overlooked, that every act of kindness is honored, and that the legacy of love and compassion will outlast all else." The ceremony was imbued with moments of quiet emotion and public celebration. Children from nearby neighborhoods gathered to perform small songs and recite poetry they had learned from local mentors. Community leaders presented heartfelt testimonials about the transformative power of secret kindnesses, and Malik, standing beside Alexander, shyly offered a handmade card, his simple message reading, "Thank you for not giving up." In that defining moment, as Alexander Blackwell looked out over the assembled crowd and the promise of a better tomorrow, he finally felt the weight of his past crimes against his own values begin to lift. The loss of his son had reawakened something inside him, a longing to let go of a former life driven solely by profit and self-preservation, and to embrace a path defined by giving, healing, and hope. The transformation within him was profound. No longer isolated in his grief, he had emerged from the shadows of memory to create a legacy that would honor his son's quiet heroism and change countless lives for the better. The day had finally arrived when Alexander Blackwell's new vision would be made manifest. A day when the legacy of his lost son would be transformed from the silent whispers of secret kindness into a resounding chorus of hope for an entire community. The chosen site for the new beginning was an expanse of urban land that had once been a forlorn, abandoned lot on the edge of a neglected neighborhood, a place where the echoes of desolation had long drowned out the dreams of those who lived there. Today, however, the area was being reborn as a state-of-the-art community school, a beacon of academic opportunity and compassion, and the physical embodiment of a foundation to be known as the Legacy Trust. At dawn, amidst a sky streaked with pale hues and the soft promise of renewal, construction crews were busy at work. Bright banners bearing the emblem of the Legacy Trust were hoisted along the perimeter of the renovation site. Local volunteers, community leaders, and a handful of curious residents gathered near the temporary wooden fences that encircled the transformation zone. For many, this had been an unremarkable patch of concrete and rusted metal for years, but today every brick was destined to tell a new story. A story of uplifted souls, of dreams nurtured, and of a future reimagined. Alexander, clad in a tailored suit that now felt markedly less oppressive than it had in the past, arrived at the site accompanied by his team of philanthropic advisors and community partners. He carried himself with a quiet dignity and an air of solemn determination. He no longer wore the detached facade of the billionaire who had once measured success only in figures and market shares. Instead, he now embodied the spirit of atonement and hope, a man willing to use his vast resources to honor his son's memory and rewrite his family's narrative. At the center of the unfolding ceremony stood a newly constructed building, its modern lines softened by artful landscaping and vibrant murals depicting scenes of community unity and childhood aspirations. The structure, destined to be the school bearing his son's name, promised to serve as a sanctuary for education and empowerment. In a specially designated memory tree garden adjacent to the building, small plaques were installed. Each plaque bore the name of a child who had, over the years, received help through the secret donations made by his son. Among them was one plaque with his son's name, now situated in a place of honor, serving as an enduring reminder of the quiet heroism that had reshaped lives behind the veil of anonymity. As the clock struck mid-morning, the ceremonial ribbon, decorated with emblems of hope and childlike doodles, was brought to the podium erected in front of the new school. A podium adorned with fresh flowers and tributes from local artists served as the stage for the opening address. The atmosphere was charged with expectation and tenderness. Parents with hopeful smiles, teachers eager to begin a new chapter, and local residents, many of them once accustomed to indifference, assembled closely to witness this historic moment. Alexander ascended the podium. His voice, strong yet resonant with personal vulnerability, filled the space. Today marks the beginning of a new journey, not only for this school, but for all of us who believe that every child deserves a chance to rise above circumstance. My son, though no longer with us, lived a life defined not by his inheritance but by the generosity he harbored in his heart. His secret acts of kindness, the quiet compassion he shared without seeking recognition, have inspired us all. His words were measured, laden with the sorrow of loss and the warmth of newfound purpose, reverberating off the freshly painted walls and into the hearts of all those present. As he spoke, a hush fell over the crowd. The gentle murmur of admiration and tears intermingled with the soft applause that punctuated moments of reminiscence. Just then, Malik, the same boy whose poignant encounter at the cemetery had been the spark for Alexander's transformation, stepped forward. Though still modestly dressed, Malik's eyes shone with the fierce pride and quiet resolve of someone who had become an unwitting custodian of his son's legacy. With trembling hands, he carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, and in a gesture laden with symbolic meaning, he presented them to the assembled crowd. His eyes met Alexander's for an instant, and in that look both men understood that the cause they championed was bigger than any one individual. Following Alexander's address, the ceremony moved to the ribbon cutting. A pair of symbolic scissors, engraved with the message "Kindness Lives On," were jointly used by Alexander and Malik to sever the ribbon that guarded the entrance to the new school. As the fabric fell gently to the ground, cheers erupted among the crowd. Children, free from the constraints of an old world of neglect, bounded forward to explore the brightly lit corridors and inviting classrooms. Educators and community members exchanged smiles and hopeful glances, recognizing that this moment signified a paradigm shift, a commitment to nurture the hidden potential of youth and to invest in futures that too often went unnoticed. In the days that followed the opening, the Legacy Trust and the newly christened school quickly became living symbols of transformation. Community events were organized, holiday celebrations initiated, and scholarship programs developed to ensure that every child could benefit from the wealth of knowledge and compassion that now unfurled within these walls. story after story began to emerge. Of a young girl who discovered a passion for literature in one of the school's modest libraries. Of a group of students who, inspired by their new mentors, formed a community outreach club. And of local neighbors who credited the school with rekindling hope in a place long abandoned by promises of progress. Alexander walked the halls of the school frequently, his once impenetrable heart softening with each interaction. He listened with intent to teachers' ideas, played with the children during recess, and quietly assured the staff that his commitment was genuine. This was not an act of public relations. It was a personal pilgrimage toward redemption. In every corner of the building, remnants of his son's hidden kindness were echoed by the laughter of children and the grateful conversations of those whose lives were being changed in real time. As twilight descended on the inaugural day, the school's facade lit by soft bulbs against the urban night sky, Alexander found himself standing outside near the Memory Tree Garden. He ran his hand along one of the plaques engraved with a child's name, then stopped before his own son's plaque. The cool evening air seemed to whisper promises of forgiveness and renewal. A serene smile crinkled Alexander's eyes as he realized that though tragic absence had once left him haunted, now his son's legacy could light the way for countless others, a living bridge between a painful past and a hopeful future. In that quiet, reflective moment, he knew that this was only the beginning. The foundation had been laid, the seeds of kindness planted, and now it was time to nurture them so that the light of compassion might glow ever brighter. The boy standing beside him, Malik, reminded him that even in the darkest hours, a single act of gratitude could change the course of a lifetime. And as the stars began to emerge overhead, Alexander Blackwell understood that his journey toward healing and redemption was now intertwined with every child who would pass through the doors of the school. A legacy of generosity that would echo far beyond tragedy, proving that kindness endures, no matter the cost. On a clear, cool morning some months after the ceremonial opening of the Legacy Trust and the community school, Alexander Blackwell found himself drawn back to the cemetery. It had become a ritual of his, a pilgrimage to the place where his son had been laid to rest and where the stirring of a new beginning had quietly taken root. This time, however, the atmosphere was entirely different. No longer did he approach the grave with the heavy burden of unbearable sorrow and self-reproach. Instead, he came with a heart slowly mending, with memories tempered by a profound understanding of his son's true legacy. The cemetery, bathed in the soft light of dawn, appeared more peaceful than before. Dew clung delicately to the grass, and the worn paths, now interspersed with small bouquets of wildflowers left by compassionate neighbors and grateful community members, whispered of healing. As Alexander parked his sleek, black car once more near the modest gate, he allowed himself a moment to breathe deeply and let the quiet speak to him. Walking along the familiar gravel path, his eyes eventually found the solitary gravestone that once symbolized unbearable loss. Now, it served as a poignant reminder of transformation, a testament to the secret acts of kindness that had rewritten his son's story and, in turn, altered Alexander's own destiny. For a long while, he stood before the stone inscribed with his son's name, his gaze soft and contemplative. In that silence, he recalled not only the tragic day that had stolen his heir, but also the bittersweet moments of discovery. The gentle words of Malik, the community's heartfelt testimonials, the secret donations of hope, and the loving scribbles in his son's private journal. As he caressed the cool surface of the stone with reverent fingers, Alexander's thoughts wandered to the faces of the children who had, through the efforts of the newly established school, begun to find promise and purpose once again. He remembered Malik, now growing a bit taller and more confident with each passing day, who had once stood at his son's grave and offered heartfelt thanks. In Malik's simple act of gratitude, Alexander saw how a single encounter could ripple outward, touching countless lives in ways that far outshone the callous arithmetic of wealth. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves around him, carrying distant echoes of laughter from the school's playground, a sound that now encapsulated hope more than it did despair. Alexander closed his eyes and offered silent thanks for the unexpected twist of fate that had led him to this moment. It was as though even nature recognized that old wounds were healing and that true legacy, the kind that endures, is measured by the lives transformed by kindness. In that sacred silence, he spoke softly, almost to himself. My son's life was not defined by the opulence he was born into, but by the love he quietly bestowed on those too often forgotten. I came here with a heart weighed down by grief, but today, I leave a part of that sorrow behind. Instead, I carry forward his spirit in every act of charity, in every glance of understanding, in every opportunity we create for a better tomorrow. His voice, roughened by years of suppressed grief, now resonated with gentle conviction. Before leaving, Alexander reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small, neatly folded letter, the very first envelope from his son's handwritten notebook that mentioned dreams of hope over wealth, mirroring the values that had been so quietly transmitted to the community. With trembling hands, he placed it gently against the stone, as if offering it as a final tribute to the boy he had lost and the hero he had unknowingly become. That letter, a symbol of the life his son had lived in secret generosity and empathy, would now serve as a message to the future. A reminder that true wealth is measured in love, sacrifice, and the willingness to uplift others. Stepping away from the grave, Alexander felt lighter than he had in months. The signs of his son's secret life, uncovered through tireless inquiries and the pristine testimonies of those he had quietly helped, were now an irrevocable part of the narrative he was committed to sharing. The transformation of his own soul paralleled the public transformation that had taken place through the creation of the school and the legacy trust. No longer was he the billionaire lost in the monotony of profit margins. He had become a steward of hope, a guardian of compassion, and a living testament to the idea that even after heartbreaking loss, one can forge a future that honors what is truly valuable in life. As he walked back to his car, the cemetery doors slowly closing behind him, Alexander allowed himself one final glance back at the grave. The rising sun bathed it in gold as if bestowing a benediction upon its memorial. In that radiant moment, he felt as though the spirit of his son smiled upon him. The pain of loss, though forever an indelible part of his past, had given way to a healing force, a force that reminded him that his son's kindness would live on in every life changed by their newfound mission. Alexander Blackwell's journey was far from over. With each step he took, he resolved to honor his son's hidden legacy by nurturing the lives of those who had long been forgotten by society. Through the Legacy Trust and the continued operations of the community school, he would ensure that the simple acts of generosity and love that had once been hidden would now shine as beacons of hope. And so, as he drove away under a sky streaked with the promise of a new day, the last echo of his earlier grief was replaced by a determined whisper inside, that even in the wake of devastating loss, meaning can be rediscovered, and life can again be filled with the joy of giving. He lost his son, but he found meaning. Subscribe to see more stories that prove kindness lives even after death.